Okay, now we're going to work through this section, design your data collection instruments. This is really where you build your project. And as I was saying earlier, there's two options to do that. The online designer, which is what we'll spend our time looking at today. That's the way most people build projects. Or the data dictionary. Again, the data dictionary is when you would format a spreadsheet to have particular REDCap formatting. And when you then upload that formatted spreadsheet here by choosing the file and uploading it, REDCap will read that spreadsheet and build the project for you. Again, if you're interested in this, there are some video tutorials, again, linked here, and also from the video tutorial link. It's the same video that you could watch if you're interested in using this feature. The main advantage of the data dictionary is it's powerful to add a lot of fields rather than using this drag and drop menu that we're going to use in the online designer, which is very user friendly. It can take some time, especially if you're building an instrument that has, for instance, 30 true or false questions. It can be quite a bit faster to do that in Excel, where you can do things like copy, paste, fill down, and so on. But we're going to focus most of the training today on the online designer, because that's the way most people build their projects. And you can follow along now with the REDCap 101 exercises handout, which you should have. So we can see that from the very beginning, we already have one thing in this project. It's by default there. It's always there. It's called My First Instrument, and it has a single field in it. The first thing I want to do is just rename this instrument. So we're going to say choose action, rename, and we're going to call this pre-screening. Okay, and that's just an instrument name that we're giving here. And I'll tell you what we're doing. I'm envisioning a very simplistic test project here. So we're essentially pretending that we each work in a lab that is interested in leg fractures. Okay, so we're studying bone breaks. And we're going to create a project that first has this pre-screening survey that we're going to really widely distribute, asking people about their age and whether they've broken a bone before and if they've broken a leg bone. And then depending on their answer to that pre-screening survey, we might want to enroll them in our study and ask them some follow-up questions. So we'll have this pre-screening instrument, and then we'll make a few other instruments with some more detailed questions. Again, these are just really basic general examples to show you how to build a project and the different field types, and to get you thinking about the different things you might want to build into your own projects for your own studies. Okay, so now we're going to choose, we're going to click our pre-screening instrument. We're going to look at that instrument or our form. By default, the first form of any project in REDCap has this field, and it's required, which is a record ID. And this is, it just needs to be a unique number that REDCap is going to use to track individual entries. By default, these will just be numbered sequentially, starting at number 1. You could turn that off if you want to use your own numbering system. The only thing that's required is that this is a unique number for every record. And this will automatically appear in the first instrument in any project. Now we're going to go in and add some fields to this pre-screening instrument. To do that, we're going to click this blue button to add a field, and we're going to select the field types, and we'll see that same drop-down list I showed a screenshot of in the slides. And now you can follow along with that table on the first page of the handout. We're going to select add a field. Our first field type is going to be a text box. And now we see a few different options for what we're going to include in our field. The first thing is the field label. This is typically a question or some sort of prompt. In the case of a survey, it's almost always going to be a question. In a case report form, it might not be a question. For instance, in a survey, you would probably ask what we're going to ask here. What is your date of birth? Because we want this to be really clear to anybody filling out the form. In a case report form where maybe an attending individual in a clinical setting is filling this out, they might not need this whole prompt. You might just put field label DOB, and they're going to know to fill in the date of birth. But in general, we're going to work in this more explicit framework that we would probably use for a survey, to have like detailed field labels that are going to be questions that are understandable to anybody taking this. Okay, the next thing that you see here are action tags. These are a bit of a more advanced feature. We're not going to use them much. We're not going to use them in our class today in the project we're building, but I will note that REDCap has these handy little links here. If you are interested in using action tags, you could click this link and you could see a bunch of details on how you could use action tags. I've included a little action tag cheat sheet at the end of this 101 handout that has some of the most commonly used action tags. So these are basically things that you can use to modify an existing field in REDCap. So if you were to type @hidden_survey, it would hide that field when this form was filled out in survey mode, but it would still be displayed if this form was filled out in a case report form. If you just put @hidden, it would be hidden no matter what. Why would you want to do that? You might want to do that if you had an old version of a question that you've collected data for a number of participants already, and now you want to ask a new version of that question, but you don't want to delete the old question and the old data that was associated with it. So you could use something like @hidden to no longer display that old question, but to still have it saved in your REDCap database. There's a number of other options here at latitude and longitude. If people have GPS services turned on, you can record some information there, and others. So feel free to read through this list if you're interested in using the action tags. We're not going to use them in the training today. So far we've just done field label, and now we're going to go into variable name. Variable names are required for every field in REDCap. This has to be a unique name associated with the particular field. This is really going to be used for how REDCap understands and refers to these fields. Only letters, numbers, and underscores are allowed in the variable name. We want to give them something short, sweet, but explicit. So here we're going to use something like DOB. And now we see that we have some validation options here. I'm going to use the option to set this as the kind of US style date format of month, day, year. That means that we're going to now have a little calendar icon and the today button next to this field like we saw in the slides. You could set a minimum and a maximum value here that would prompt a user if they enter a date, or if we were doing another type of field. Anything outside of that range would prompt the user that their value is falling out of an expected range, but REDCap will still accept that value. Finally, we can mark a field as required or not. If the field is required, it will prompt the user to fill it out if it's blank. And the last thing we'll focus on here is if it's an identifier or not. Does this field contain identifying information such as name, social security, address, and date of birth is an identifying piece of information? So we're going to mark that as yes. That's very important for REDCap projects because there are options to, for instance, not allow some users to export identifying information, or to just say, while you're doing a data export, even if you have access to identifying information, to not include it in a particular export. Maybe an export that you're going to be sending to a statistician for analysis and they don't need to be working with the identifying information. You might select that export option at some point. However, the only way that REDCap knows what is a piece of identifying information or not is whether the person who built the project has selected that this is a piece of identifying information. So it's really important to mark all identifying information as a yes here. The last few things, custom alignment. This aligns the field on the page. You basically are only ever going to use right and vertical. The other ones tend to look a little unusual, but feel free to mess around with those if you're curious. Field notes are an option to display some reminder text underneath the field. We'll look at an example of that later. Most of this stuff is really cosmetic. The main things we'll be paying attention to are field labels, variable names, validation, and these required or identifier. That's something we're going to fill in for just about every field. Okay, we'll save it. We now see that we've created this field, and we're going to go through our list now, adding the next one. Add field. By default, the previous field type is always selected, so automatically we see the text box option here. For our next field, though, we want to use multiple choice radio buttons, so we're going to select that. We're going to enter our field label. What sex were you assigned at birth? Question mark. We'll give it a variable name as just sex, and then we are going to code in some answer choices here. This is a new box that has appeared now that we selected a multiple choice option. So multiple choice, drop down, radio buttons, or checkboxes will all be coded the same way, which is as follows: an integer, comma, the answer choice. So in this case, I'm going to say 1, comma, male, 2, comma, female. I do want to point out that I'm kind of making these questions here just to demonstrate these field types. I'm not being as careful in my study design as I would be, here in this training, compared to if I was building an actual research project, where you might want to ask both a sex and a gender question, and you might want to include some other options just besides a male and female here. But to keep things simple and not make you do a ton of typing in this training, I'm just streamlining that process. However, it's certainly not something you want to skimp on when you're making your own REDCap projects. Okay, I'm going to save this field. One thing I'll point out, the numerics here don't matter. It's just the order of these choices on the line. So I could have put 10, comma, male, 0, comma, female, and the answer choices would still, to the user, be first male, then female. So the number doesn't matter so much. There just needs to be a number, comma, the answer choice associated with any multiple choice question in REDCap. Save. Next, we're going to add a field type. We're going to select the yes or no field type. You could build this field type using the multiple choice questions. It's just when you select yes, no, REDCap has already coded these choices for us. That's nice because it prevents you from accidentally coding, yes as a 0 and 1 as a no next time and confusing your data a little bit. So yes, no, and true, false are multiple choice questions that REDCap has hardwired in for us. Now we're going to ask the question, are you pregnant? We're going to give it the variable name PREG, and we're just going to leave it at that and save it. Okay, add another field at the bottom here. Have you ever broken a bone? Give it the variable name bone underscore break. Save. Add another field, another yes, no. Have you broken a bone in your leg? Variable name leg underscore break. And we'll save that as well. I know I might be moving a little quickly here, so feel free to stop and pause the video at any point, rewind and work through, or if you're moving along pretty quickly too, then go ahead and run through it at whatever speed is comfortable for you. After this, we're going to add another field. This time we're going to switch it from a yes, no to a text box. We're going to give it the field label, how old were you when you broke your leg? We'll give it the variable name break age. And now we are going to set a validation. We're going to ask for an integer here because we're asking for an age. And it's nice to really take advantage of these validations whenever possible. For instance, somebody could write, without this validation, somebody could put in TEN that they were 10 years old, or they might put in 10 that they were 10. That's just going to require a little bit more work to analyze down the road. So by using these validations, like an integer prompt here, that'll make sure your data is a little bit cleaner. If somebody were to try to write TEN, they would be prompted and say, we're expecting an integer here, please enter an integer. Okay, now the next thing I want to show is a new field type that isn't always intuitive to people at first. And this would be how to add a section header. So say you wanted to break a form into something like a medical history section, a psychological survey section. If you had a number of questions in each of those areas within a single instrument, you might want to add little section headers, or maybe you just need to provide some instructions before these things. You could do that by adding a field with optional text. So I'll show you how to do that. We're going to do that now by looking for the question, have you ever broken a bone? And right before that question, we're going to select to add the field there, okay? And now we're going to select from this list, begin new section with optional text, okay? That strips away all of the different options except for the field label, and we could put in anything here. In this case, I'm just using it as an example. We're going to put medical history and save it. Okay, and that creates just this empty field that's just a little header for this section. Okay, so we've built our first relatively simple instrument here, and I just want to walk through a few things. To edit any question, we can see this little pencil icon. You could click on that to edit something. So if you had a typo, like I sometimes do, you would click that pencil, and that would open up the window that you used to create that field, and you could modify it and save it. You could copy a question with this little 2-piece of paper icon. We'll, in a minute, look at how to add branching logic. In that case, we're going to click on this little green split arrow. You can move a question either by just clicking on it and dragging it, like I am now, to reorder questions, or you could specifically click on this little compass icon. And the X would delete a question. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is look at how to add branching logic. Branching logic is an option you can add to any field to hide or reveal that field based on the answer to a previous question. This might sound a little complicated, but REDCap makes it really easy to do. So, for instance, and branching logic is quite good for streamlining the user experience. So we might not want to, waste people's time asking them if they were pregnant if they answered that they were male. So we could add branching logic to this "Are you pregnant?" question. We do that by clicking on the split arrow on the question that we either want to hide or reveal, so the "Are you pregnant?" question. There's an option here to use advanced branching logic syntax. We're not going to do that. You can learn how to do it. There's a little how-to here, but generally it's a bit more complicated. The drag and drop logic builder is a lot more user-friendly. This lets us select any field in our project to branch on. So in this case, we've asked, "Are you pregnant?" And we're going to say we want to show the current field, "Are you pregnant?" only when which of the following is true. So what do you think we'll drag over from here? Right, we're going to drag sex equals female over because we're only going to ask the question, "Are you pregnant?" to people that selected in the prior field that they were female. Okay, and we'll save that. So we've added branching logic, and we can see that here. We're going to do that for a few other questions. Under the question, "Have you broken a bone in your leg?" we'll click the branching logic. Oh, sorry, I did that wrong. Under the for the question, "Have you broken a bone in your leg?" we're going to add branching logic to that question based on the prior one. "Have you ever broken a bone?" If somebody has never broken a bone, obviously they've never broken a bone in their leg. We don't want to ask them that follow-up question. So we're going to use the drag and drop logic builder. Only if bone break equals yes do we want to display this question. Okay, and we'll save it. And then finally for this one, "How old were you when you broke your leg?" Well, we're only going to ask that question if someone broke their leg. If leg break equals yes. Okay, and then we'll save it. Notice this is one of the reasons we want to use pretty descriptive variable names, because with the branching logic builder and a few other things, REDCap uses the variable names, not the field labels. So if we had given all of our variables all of our fields variable names like Q1, Q2, Q3, things could get pretty confusing. Q1 equals yes or no, or Q3 equals yes or no. So that's why you want to be descriptive and concise with your variable name. So leg break, that is pretty obvious what we're talking about. And we'll save. Okay. So we've just created this field now, this first instrument, and now let's test this instrument by seeing how we would interact with it as a case report form. This is the same way that you would collect new data with this instrument in an active project. To do that, we're going to go to the left-hand menu and we're going to click on Add and Edit Records. You could either edit an existing record, but we don't have any, so there's none to edit. We're going to choose to add a new record. REDCap's telling us, okay, by default, that record ID field is going to numerically count up for us. So record number 1, let's fill this out. And this is just what we would do if we were now seeing a patient or a study subject. We're asking them, what's your date of birth? Let's just fill in some random information here. It can be whatever you want. What sex were you assigned at birth? If you click male, nothing happens. If you click female, you can see the are you pregnant question. Have you ever broken a bone? Let's say you answer these affirmatively so we see the branching logic. Have you broken a bone in your leg? Yes. How old were you? 12. And then we could, okay, the next thing that you see is whether the questionnaire is complete or not. So this is really a record keeping thing you can do in your project. You could say it's incomplete, unverified, or complete. I'm going to mark now that this is complete and save and exit the form. It's now marked as green. There's only a single record, so that's not so helpful now, but you can imagine when you have dozens or hundreds of records in your project, being able to see right from the beginning in this what's called the record status dashboard, if the given record in each instrument was complete, not started, incomplete, or unverified. You could follow those along. Let's add a second test record now. I just want to show a few things. So we're going to add a new record. It's automatically done. Number 2. I don't feel like typing here, so I'm just going to click today as if I was born today. I'll answer that I'm male. I'm gonna say I broke a bone, and I'll show you what happens if I tried to say I broke it when I was 10. The value provided is not an integer. Please try again. Okay, so that's where we would know that we need to enter 10. Oh, I think I clicked something wrong. I accidentally clicked off no here, so and then it was gonna say, oh, this field would be hidden. Okay. And we can save and exit the form here. We'll mark it as complete again.